Every year, the website BibleGateway.com publishes a review of the year, where they list the most searched for verses over the past 12 months. And every year, the top 5 verses are pretty much the same, although this year there is one exception. These verses are some of the most familiar ones, but that doesn't mean that they are always understood properly. Take this week's verse, for example, Romans chapter 8, verse 28. People often use it to cheer someone up. If you're having a difficult time or something bad happens, people might say something like, "Don't worry, remember everything works together for good." Now by that, they are saying that God will make everything work out as we would want. But often things don't get better, or something happens that doesn't seem to be the good that we expect. Now the problem isn't that God hasn't kept his promise. God always keeps his promises. It's more that our definition of good is different to God's, and that we focus on ourselves rather than God's plan for our lives. In the same way, the Spirit also comes to help us, weak as we are. For we do not know how we ought to pray. The Spirit himself pleads with God for us in groans that words cannot express. And God, who sees into our hearts, knows what the thought of the Spirit is, because the Spirit pleads with God on behalf of his people and in accordance with his will. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Those whom God has already chosen, he also set apart to become like his Son, so that the Son would be first among many believers. And so those whom God set apart, he called. And those he called, he put right with himself, and he shared his glory with them. You'll have noticed that we read several verses rather than just the one that we're looking at. And that's important because we need to see how a verse fits into the ones around it. The extra verses gives us what we call the context, and will often help us to understand individual verses better. Now the first thing we see is that God's promise is for a particular set of people. The verse says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." So it's a promise given to those who love God. In other words, Christians. God is always working for our good, for our benefit. That's great, you say, "I'm a Christian, everything in my life should be easy." Well, no. The Bible never promises that following Jesus will be easy. In fact, the Bible warns the opposite, that we will face hardship and opposition if we follow Jesus. And notice that the verse doesn't say that all things will work together so that everything is good. It says that all things work together for the good of those who love him. So what does that mean? Well, firstly, what we think is good for us isn't always the way God views things. Because of our sin, we're more interested in the things that make us happy than the things that strengthen our faith. If we look at verse 29, it helps us to understand what God considers as good for us. It tells us that those God has chosen, he's set apart to become more like his Son Jesus. So God is working to help all believers to become more like Jesus. This is God's good for our lives. So Romans chapter 8 verse 28 is a reminder that in every situation that we face, God uses it to shape us, to train us, to become more like Jesus. And tough and challenging times, where we're forced to depend more on God himself, are often the times that we learn and grow more deeply.
And we know that God causes everything to work together together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose for them. That's why I am a singing, love the Lord. That's why I am a singing, love the Lord. 'Cause everything works together for the good of those who love the Lord. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose for them. That's why I am a singing,